So today we're going to bounce around between some related topics. In our last session on Thursday, we showed you some basics about data organization and how to structure data so that it can be more accessible, so that it allows for analysis, right? And basically what you're seeing here is in 1972, a gentleman by the name of Codd defined how relational algebra works. So he is one of the pioneers of relational algebra, for those of you who are math fans. And more importantly, there are components of relational algebra in terms of the math discipline that allow for modern databases to function the way they do. We take this for granted. You see CSI episodes where somebody says, okay, we're looking for a culprit who's driving a 57 Ford GTO. And I'm mixing up that example because I don't think a GTO is a Ford. I'm just making it interesting to see if you folks are paying attention. So you have these needle in a haystack scenarios where you can narrow it down. Okay, I'm looking for someone who has children in their home. I'm looking for someone who, is beyond this age. So you can basically query a specific set of data sets that are related. So a set of data sets, there's a mouthful. When we're relating those tables or data sets, we're creating relationships. And so those relationships are often referred to as joins. And when you have a row in a data table, it's called a record, or in computer science terms, it's called a tuple. And in terms of data modeling, we're going to review a diagram here and then take this into our Access environment. Earlier this month, we asked folks to take a look at validating access to Access. And officially, if you do not have a Windows PC, you can still accomplish the task. And it shows how you can set up Access for Mac users. So essentially, if you have a Mac, you can create a virtual machine and then go to the Microsoft Downloads website in our campus portal and download a version of Microsoft Server 2022, which looks, feels, and acts just like Windows 10, except that it's a full-blown server version. And once you do that, you can go into the Office 365 website, also on the My Campus portal, and download a copy of Office 365 into the virtual machine you set up with your server. Now, this video clip is a short one from 6 October 2020, but it still is valid. And essentially, you're going to need to be able to prove that even though you have a Mac, you can work with Access. Now, an alternative to satisfying the assignment that you're going to see posted right above here is that you go to a computer lab on the Albert Einstein campus or the Orville E. Keene campus. Hope I'm saying that right. Over on St. Thomas. You can log in with your student ID, and Access should be, you should be able to access Access right off the start menu once you log in. Now it's going to create a user profile and it'll take a while, but you can go ahead and satisfy that requirement just by going to a computer lab and doing it in the computer lab. So are there any questions about our posted assignment here? So it'd be good for you to watch this. And it takes all of...
So we're showing how you get Microsoft server licenses.
So here's where I show you how to get a hold of server licenses. You'll see the reference in this video is Server 2019, but I would recommend you download the 2022 version. So what am I saying? If you look here in our VirtualBox environment, the PG Book VM is here, but there's also a Windows Server Standard Edition. When you download the server install software, I would recommend that you get the key for the Standard Edition, not the Data Center Edition, unless you're really cocky about how much horsepower you have under your gaming laptop's hood. That usually ends very badly when people try to install a data center version of Windows on a laptop. Just saying. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I still have a Raspberry Pi.
You still have a Raspberry Pi. So the good news is I located over the weekend a running version of Windows 10 virtual machine that you can remotely access using the Raspberry Pi. And now, are you saying you don't have any other access to any other resources?
I mean, there's an online version of what's it called? Of Microsoft Word, all Excel and all that stuff, but it's only accessible online.
Right. And if I look at this and I scroll to Office 365, unfortunately, I don't think access is available online.
Yeah, it's free to use. All of that, and you don't even need an access code.
Yeah. Well, okay, so when you install Office, it installs the Professional Edition, I think.
No, not well, they don't have a version made for Ubuntu.
No, they don't. But you'll notice here, you don't see Microsoft Access. You see Excel, you see Word, you see PowerPoint. And if we choose the apps, there's Sway and Visio. So that's for social media and that's for drawing diagrams and such. If we go here, I don't see Access showing in Office. And that's the problem, is that the online version doesn't have access and neither does the Mac version. So if you own a Mac and you go to the Office 365 website in the My Campus portal, it doesn't have access. As
So I
something,
have a quick question,
Yep.
Mr. Ganta. So when you had access to, when you was telling us that we could go to the library on Ira campus and first to sign up on the computer and go on to access, that was for everybody or for certain users?
well, that's for every student. So if you go to the library and you want to sign out a laptop, you can sign out a laptop for an evening or for an entire semester. And if you're told they don't have one for an entire semester, you should send me an email. But when you go to a screen in the library or in a computer lab, you should be able to click on the start menu and you won't see access listed like it is for me because I intentionally put it there, but you can start typing access and it'll show up and then you can basically open it up. So every student accessible screen available on campus should offer access. And the kinds of things we're doing here, you can work in 30 minutes to 45 minutes, okay?
And we can't do it off our personal computers.
You can do it on your personal computer. I would recommend you do it on your personal computer. And if you log into Office from the My Campus portal here by clicking on Office 365, you can install Office on your laptop. And if you have a Windows laptop, it includes Access because it's a higher version of Office. So what will happen is that it'll start this process, and then you'll see the options to install Microsoft Office, and that'll include Access. Now, inside here, when I go into Microsoft software downloads, this is where you go to download a free version of Windows, except instead of being Windows 10, it's Windows Server. And it may prompt you for a login, in which case you put in your student email address, you know, students.uvi.edu, and then you can type in your student ID and your password. It's the same password that you get in. Under software, there's a number of products that you can download. And you'll notice that Server 2022 and Server 2022 Standard are available. The trick is to get a copy of the key. And when you click on View the Key, there's a copy option to the right, or you can simply drag your mouse over it and then Control-C to copy it. When you click Download, it'll download the same install media, ISO, it's called an install image, that sets up Server Standard and Server Data Center. So both versions of the server can be installed. The only difference is when you're using this product key, it'll queue to pull up the standard installation, and if you use the data center, it'll pull up the data center. The key that you have on your screen is unique to you. So when I show this on screen now, if you were to use this, it would say, well, that's already in use. And then I would get a notice, and Microsoft would get a notice, and I'd know that somebody with an IP address of logged in on this network is doing some naughty stuff. And that generally doesn't end well. So, but everybody, the good news is everybody has their own license, right? So by virtue of being a student at the University of the Virgin Islands, each of you has a bona fide licensed version of all the education software resources here in Microsoft Azure for Education. Now, the access option, if we hit product categories and select just database, it used to be you could essentially pull a copy of Access that you could install separately, and I'm not sure if that's still valid, but anyway. Any questions about the education software you can download? So once you have that download, you're using that to set up this. And by the way, over the weekend, there were lots and lots of security updates, including VirtualBox. So for your PG Book virtual machine, you will need to download the latest version of Oracle VirtualBox and the extension pack, and then install that and update it. So you should be running 6.1.38. And for Windows, you should be running one of the versions, either Home Edition or Professional Edition, Enterprise Edition or Education Edition. You should be on 19.044, and that's 21H2, and it should read 2006. And if you're not running that latest version of Windows 10, it means there's some updates you need, and otherwise you're vulnerable. Any questions about this?
I'm still, do you want me to use a virtual box or yeah, for Raspberry Pi then?
What I can do is if you send me an email, if you send me
Yeah,
an
do you want
email,
me to use my laptop?
you could use your laptop just for the access. You could use
Yeah,
you could use the Raspberry Pi for all the stuff that we do with the custom programming and the Linux environment.
Mm-hmm.
You could use your laptop just to worry about the access assignments. There's a solution and an assignment related to access the database.
No problem.
Okay, and that would keep things simple.
Yeah. Cool. All right, thank you.
Yes. So one of the things we wanted to do was to get you to the place where you were comfortable working in Linux. And so there's a set of commands we want you to use from the terminal. We want you to be able to redirect output from the terminal prompt so that it's captured in a file. We want you to be able to append, which means we want you to be able to add to it. And then we want you to be able to view it. So you can use the terminal command cat, which is short for concatenate, to display the contents of a data file. And then you can also use a different variation of that to capture what you type into the keyboard into the data file. We also want you to be able to become familiar with head, tail, and difference commands, paste, cut, and join. These are all outlined in your textbook. And then we want you to be able to work in Python to repeat tasks. And we want you to be able to troubleshoot simple things and then connect to a remote system. So for those of you that are still scratching your heads and saying, okay, I have a MacBook and it's the latest processor M1 and I can't run a virtual machine and I can't load access and I don't have, I can't get to the campus after hours, fear not, you can still connect remotely to a PG book system and do what you need to do remotely across the internet with PG book. So we want you to, we've already talked about the 3 quick measures to resolve most common Linux errors and dysfunctional scenarios. And it had to do with the 3 Ps from last week. Does anyone remember what one of the Ps are?
Path, privilege,
Path, privilege,
and permission.
and permissions. Correct. Path, privilege, and permissions. One of those 3 is usually the problem when you're in there. In Linux in particular, a number of commands are a little thorny, but getting your way around, there is a Linux command line cheat sheet. You should see it in the module 2, either in the references or resources folder. What I wanted to do was to spend a little bit of time with this before we dove into our textbook to talk more about databases. Does anyone have any questions about the iterative thing we did with Excel last week? Or did I leave people completely confused? I'm getting crickets. Does that mean we're good, or let's make this really big. Can we do this and just review very briefly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's what we call an iteration. And here's what we call now, when we iterate a series of calculations, what we're doing with each successive cycle of calculation, there is something that changes each and every time. When we are creating a series of an object, we're basically creating an identical copy of the same thing, okay? So, or in some cases, we're changing the value of the next step in that series in a predictable pattern. Has anybody ever heard of a Fibonacci series?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fibonacci, but it's a set of numbers. Am I correct?
Well, I want you to think, I know that, yeah, you know what? Let's not get into the Fibonacci stuff right now. Let's just stick with what we mean by an iteration, okay? Let's just take one example at a time. What we want to do is take a value and use it each and every time, okay? So I'm going to create a value, and I want to call this 3.14. Now that should ring a bell. Does anybody remember 3.14? 1592712. I don't want to sound like a nerd, but that should ring a bell.
And
Yep.
the value for pi.
That's pi. It's the value of pi, right? 3.141596271 something or other, blah, 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 blah. And there's no end to it. It just goes on and on and on. And that's one of the cute fascinations that mathematics folks have. But in any case, we're just going to store the value for pi. And the location or label for this value is in the first cell, in the first row, in the first column. And we identify the first row in the first cell in the first column by using the column letter and the row number. So this box is cell A1. Is everybody with me?
Yes.
Okay, now this is a description. We have typed in some letters. Even though this is Excel and our primary interest is numbers, we want to explain something on the screen so that the users know what they're looking at. So we take a label to explain what we're doing next, and we would call that an output value. We can say that this cell is displaying an output value called, and it's two words, an iteration, right? So in terms of programming sensibilities, you have inputs, you have outputs, you have process in between, right? That's the IPO table kind of thing. And this is an output, but it's not a number. What location is this cell? Well, it's in column B, row 2. So the identifier for this cell is what, everyone?
B2.
B2. Thank you very much. I was afraid I was going to have to start speaking in tongues or something. All right, so now let's say that we have a radius here, and I'm going to put the word radius here, which would be like the distance of the center of a circle to its outer perimeter, right? Everybody knows what I mean by radius?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the cell location where I have entered the word radius to identify what comes next as an output value? What's the cell identifier for radius?
A2.
A2 is correct, okay? Now, I know this is really kind of lockstep, but I want you to bear with me. So I'm going to say that I have a radius of increasing size down the screen, and I'm going to say this is in meters, okay? So I can, let's just pretend that this is in meters, and I'm going to say 1, 2, and 3. Whoop, 3. And we'll even put a fourth one there. And what is the formula for the area of a circle?
A equals 2 pi r.
A equals what now?
Pi r squared, sorry.
Pi r squared. Yeah, there's a 2 in there, but
2 pi r squared.
yep, 2 pi r. Well, 2 pi r is
No, 2
something
pi
else.
r is pi r squared. Yeah, pi r squared is the area. You have to the
Yeah.
area?
Pi r squared is the area, but 2 pi r is something different. Does anyone know
Yeah.
what, you know what, does anyone know what 2 pi r is?
Isn't it the
What's
radius?
circumference?
Circumference, if not
It is the
mistaken.
length of the circumference, that's right. So
Oh,
the
that makes them up.
distance you travel around, if you go around the clock, like from the top of the circle, 12 o'clock, all the way around to 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, then if you go in a clock either direction, if you travel all the way around the circle, beginning at a single point and you continue all the way around the edge back to that same point, that distance is called the circumference, right? So 2 pi r is circumference. All right. Now, what we want to do is make life easy. So we're going to yoke the extra features of an Excel spreadsheet, but this works in any spreadsheet. And what I'm going to do is put in a formula. So area here I'm going to do this just to make it look pretty. Everybody still with me?
Yep. Yes.
So I'm just changing some font choices so it's a little obvious. I'll tell you what, we'll go here and I'll merge these and then I'll click into here and do this. Oh, I know you didn't do that. Iteration. I should be able to paste this, cut this and paste this into here. There we go. Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah. So I'm going to make this pretty. I just like doing things that way. All right. So we know that pi r squared is the formula for the area. And this is just a label again, so that we have an idea of what we're dealing with. And what we want to do is create some output here based on inputs. So the input for the radius in meters begins with which cell? What is this cell reference right here?
A5.
A5. You can see it up here. So it'll be column A, row 5. And what I want to do is I want to take this reference, pi, and I want to multiply it by this, and then multiply it by this again, r squared. Everybody with me?
Yes.
So I'm going to start the formula or the calculation with an equal sign. And that tells Excel, okay, we're going to be doing some work here. And I want to multiply pi times the radius times the radius again. So I click it a second time and you'll notice up here it says A3 times A5 times A5. In other words, pi times r squared for this first calculation. R is 1 meter. Everybody with me?
Yes.
I hit enter. Now, one thing I tried to demonstrate last week was when you repeat calculations, a lot of times you want a value to change. For instance, I want the radius reference to change as I go down the screen. So if I take this and I do something like this and I copy this, I do a copy. And then I escape out of there and I click on the one below and I copy it again. I paste it, right? I'm just going to paste it. What I've done, all I've done is repeated the same formula. But the problem is that my radius has changed. In row 6, the radius is 2. And I know for a fact, 1 times 1 times 3.14, well, my output is still the same. So I should see 4 times that amount because the radius 2 is squared. So I can't just copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. This is what we would do if we were clueless and we were using the tools of technology in an uninformed manner. That's the reason you're taking this course, so that you can learn really cool, really slick ways of doing this so that it does the work for you. So what we're going to do here is we're going to repeat the copy of this formula all the way down this column so that it pulls radius 1, radius 2, radius 3, radius 4. But we're going to do it in a manner where this remains the same. So we're making decisions about what remains constant or absolute And in order for A3 to remain absolute, I need to anchor it. Absolute requires an anchor. Think of the word absolute reference. A for absolute requires an anchor. In this case, the anchor is the $ before the column reference and the row reference. Pi is A3. Everywhere I see A3, I have to do this in front of A, and I have to do this in front of 3. And that anchors the reference. So if I hit enter now, I want to see if that has any effect on my output. I hit enter. Nope. And I'm going to get rid of this, by the way. I'm going to take that out. I don't want to copy the same thing down the page, because all I'm going to get is the same first calculation and the same result all the way down the screen. I want an iteration. I want a repetitive cycle of calculations that generates a series of different results that I can use for simulations, for investigations, and I want to have a social life, right? I want to live and enjoy life and have time on a Saturday night, and so I don't want to just do mechanical repetitive things like my ancestors did. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to copy it into here. Now, if I did this correctly, it's going to pull this reference instead of this one, but it's going to stay put and it's going to stay anchored to this. So I can copy this now. And if I paste it, oops. I still have a problem using the copy command, copy the command, copy the command. I have to use something called a fill down instead. A fill down understands that I want a series and I want references to change. So if you ever worried about whether or not you should use copy and paste in this class, I'm going to try to give you scenarios that are very frustrating when you do it. I'm telling you that up front. I want you to highlight from 3.14, and what you're going to do is use some keystrokes to tell it to fill down this formula from here into here, into here, into here. And because of the way the formula is written, it's going to see A6, A7, and A8 here, here, and here. But it's going to see A3, 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 A3. It's only going to see this. This isn't going to change, but the radius will change, okay? So I'm going to hold down the Alt key, tap E, Alt E, shoot. All right, let's do this again. I'm going to highlight my series, press Alt E, then the I for insert, and then the D for down. Now I have a question for you. If I have a pizza that's has a radius that's 4 times as long, is there 4 times the area in the pizza? Or is there more to it?
Repeat that.
Can you repeat the question, please?
If I have a pizza that has a radius of 1 meter, and then I compare it to a pizza with a radius of 4 meters, is the second pizza going to be 4 times as large? Or is it going to be that much more larger than the 1 meter pizza? What do you see?
It'll be larger.
Yeah.
Maybe larger.
Oh, much
Way
larger.
larger.
Yeah, way
About
larger.
4 times.
Well, 4 squared to be exact, because the radius is squared. The radius is 4 times as much as this radius, but then I square it. So instead of being
Yes.
1, it's going to be 16. In fact, if I take this right here and I take my first value, 3.14, and I always like double checking. When I do stuff with a spreadsheet, I like to try to get a calculator out and do some manual checks, right? I'm going to divide 50.24 by 3.14. I'll put this in the memory, and then I'm going to type in 50.24 and divide by, now let's recall the memory, 3.14 equals 16. How about that? So I know we could do this manually. I don't want you to do this manually because after midterms, I'm going to ask you to go back to the spreadsheet and I'm going to ask you to calculate 1 million random values. Not 4, 250,000 times what we just did. And I'm going to ask you to use a function in Excel to automatically recalculate totally random numbers, 1 million of them, with a mouse click. And you're actually going to hear your fan on the laptop or the PC start blowing. It'll strain a little bit. All right. I want you to get what we're doing here, crawl, walk, run, and then I want you to take it out to scale. So what am I saying? We just did 4 of these, but I want you to be able to take it out to 10, 25, 50, and just keep doing this when you become comfortable with the idea of how this works. Now, once again, we told you that if you have constant values, things you don't want changing, like the value of pi, you should keep those in the upper left corner of a spreadsheet and you should run your series down differently, right? So if I want to graph this now, all I have to do is highlight this, insert a chart. Let's do a line. I want to see all the charts. I want to select line charts. I'll do this first one right here. Yeah. Okay. So that's what happens to the area of a circle as the radius increases mildly. This is what happens to the area of the circle, right? Iterative means we're repeating a series of calculations. I'm going to zoom out here so I can work with this. I'm going to reduce the size of this. And then, whoa, Control Z is your friend. So you can always Control Z and there we go. There you have it. Radius, area, chart title. We can say increase in area as radius with radius, okay? With radius. Some kind of title that makes sense. All right, so when we say iteration, look at the upper left corner here. As I move down, you'll see A3 doesn't change, but it changes from A5 to A6 to A7 to A8, right? There we go, 6, 7, 8. Everybody see that? 5, 6, 7, 8. 5, 6, 7, 8. You'd think it was a music class for the way we're talking today. All right, any questions about iteration in a spreadsheet? Now, when you go through the walkthrough for kinetic energy and creating linking and embedding between Excel and the example we did, just remember what we've done here. All right, so let's continue on with Linux. And one of the things I want to tell you is that this handy reference is useful because if you want a command based on its function, that's what I like about this reference. So I would keep it handy. Sometimes I forward things to my phone or my iPad just so that they're available. But if you want quick information for your Linux system, for your PC book, if you want to know why it's taking so long, you can see what's happening to the memory, what's happening to the CPU. It'll tell you hardware information, performance statistics. You can figure out whether or not somebody's on your system, hacking your system, using your system when they're not supposed to because they're in your Kool-Aid. You can get into file and directory commands or process management commands. You can change permissions, privileges. You can connect across the network. You can build backups, which is very important in scientific computing applications. You need to be able to capture backups of the data you collect. Of course, being able to install packages. So let's take a look at that one. We've told you about apt-get. When you want to install something, you can use apt-get. So you're saying I want to get an application when you're using the apt-get command, but on many Linux systems, yum is the command you can use to install a certain kind of package, right? When you're searching, you can search for specific patterns in data files. So you can find precisely where a given date or a given name or a given value is, and that's very helpful. Basically, these are connection commands so that if you want to use a Raspberry Pi or a PGBook remotely, you can say SSH PGBook at PGBookVM, or you can put in PGBook at and then put in the IP address or network address, and it'll connect you to the PGBook I have running in my office. Right? Let's go back. So system information. When we talk about using commands, there's a primary command, but then we have additional options or attributes, switches, they're often called. And there's usually a space that follows. One of the things that you can do is string one command after another. So you could say, okay, I want to know the date, and then I want to know how long my system's been up. And I want those to run one after another. So let's see how that works. I'm going to start my PGBook here. Any questions so far?
Nope.
If you're on a Raspberry Pi or a Mac, you can open up the terminal prompt in the Mac or the Raspberry Pi. And so we're going to do date first, then uptime. Can everyone still see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
When you open up your terminal, the first prompt you're going to get has regular user privileges, and most of the commands that you need to operate with do not require administrative privileges. So if I type in the date command, it's going to come back and say it's Tuesday, September 20th, and it actually gives me the time, right? Now, let's say I used uptime. Well, it says it's been up 1 minute and there's one user on there, and it gives me some load information. Now that's useful because in a scientific computing or research laboratory, you may have a computer system that's shared by 100 or 1,000 different users. And so you're going to want to be able to see how long has the system been up, how many users are on it, and what kind of load is it carrying, right? Well, let's say that I want the output of the first command, and then I want the output of the second command. And I'd just like to have one command execute and then the next command execute. I'm going to go ahead and type in the date command, and then I'm going to put 2 ampersands, and then I'm going to follow that by the word uptime. Any questions? When I hit enter, it gives me the output of the first command, and then it executes the second command right away. Now, another option is that I can create a script. I can create a script with a .sh extension, and that script can execute the commands in order, and that's a very helpful thing. So I can either string a bunch of manual commands together, or I can create a script and then just run the script, and the script in turn will run each of the commands. You probably already know this. Okay. Now, what happens if I have a command and I want to take the output of one command and feed it into another command? Like, let's say I want to look at the help for the uptime command. Is everybody with me?
Yes.
And can everybody see how?
Yes, we can see it.
So part of the help is on the screen, but then it says, hey, if you want to see more, then you got to keep hitting the space or arrow to keep displaying more. So this isn't showing everything about the uptime command. There's a longer description. And what I can do is I use the man command, which is open manual, right? So, and then I said uptime. So give me the uptime manual is basically what I was doing. And let's say that I don't want to have to go a screen at a time, a line at a time. I can do this and go, if I hit the space bar, I'm going a screen at a time. Or if I hit the return key, I'm going like, or the down arrow key. Actually, I might be at the end. I think I'm at the end. Yeah, so I have to press Q to quit. If I want that content in a single file where I can see it all at once, I can take the result of this command and I can pipe it into, I can capture it into another file and then just display the file. Okay, so I'm going to call this handyman. Yeah, I'm going to call this handyman, right? So I'm going to take man uptime and I'm going to redirect the output. So instead of being on the screen, I want it to go to handyman dot uptime. I'm going to create my own help files just because I'm that goofy. When I hit enter, the output of that command is going to be redirected to a text file. And now when I look at my directory, handyman is right here and it has 1900 characters in it, right? And if I want to see that, I can use the cat command to display handyman. So handyman dot uptime. Well, that went so fast, the first two screens flew right by. But basically I can scroll up now and see everything on the screen, right? So I have everything all together. Does everybody understand what I did right there? Now, let's pretend that I had a script where when I captured data, I wanted to put the date at the end of what I captured. Can anybody think of a situation where capturing the date along with some data would be useful?
To
So
mark
if you're
them.
looking, go ahead.
No, man, you go.
Yeah, you can
I
mark it.
was,
You can mark it based on the day and the time so that later on, if you want to, you can retrieve that information based on the date and time, right? So let's pretend that I have this file now, and in its contents, at the very end, it says December of 2012. That's the date of the manual that I captured in a single data file, okay? I'm going to take handyman dot uptime, and I'm going to add the date to the end. So what am I saying? If I put date here, I'm going to see September 20th, Tuesday, and it's going to be the last line instead of this showing. Is everybody with me? So I have a data file. I want to stamp it, which means I want to take a process where I'm capturing data to a file, but then the last thing I want to do is add the date command to the end of it. And I want to do it in a way where the date is appended to the end of it, right? So what's important to understand is the difference between redirection and appending. If I take my file and I do this, date, and then I do this, and then I say handyman dot update. It's been a couple of minutes. The time is now, so this thing ran around 1:04 p.m. No, it's 1:04 now. I created this file called handyman.update a couple of minutes ago. So if I look at the list of that file, I'm going to see that, let's see when it was created. Handyman was created exactly at, no, that can't be right. 1 o'clock? Yeah, it's created exactly at 1 o'clock. Now, what's going on here with my virtual machine versus my Windows machine? Anyone? Would anyone care to guess what's going on?
They're reading 2 different times, or like on 2 separate operating differently.
Right,
We're seeing a log.
right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and run this because it's the wrong time and I want to see what happens. I want you to see what happens. I have a file called handyman, and it's the manual of the uptime command. And so I'm going to create all these handyman this, handyman that, handyman so-and-so, and I'm going to put date time stamps after them. So I'm going to go ahead and append the date after the end of handyman uptime. Now this was created at 1 o'clock according to this system time, which is off. The author of your book, I think they're either using Greenwich Mean Time or they're using like West Coast. It's 3 hours off, right? So it looks like this is,
that's West Coast time.
yeah, that's like California time, isn't it?
Yes, definitely California.
So watch what happens here. If I do date, and then I append this to the end of handyman.update. And now I repeat the same command to list that file. If it's been modified, that date might change to the current time. But the size will also change. The size will also change because instead of just being 1.9, it's going to have some extra stuff at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and hit my up arrow twice, 3 times. I want to just, I'm going to clear the screen here because I just want to There we go. And let's cat handyman dot update. Oh my. Oh my. All I have is the end. Oh, what did I do? Well, let's look. See, now this is something that frustrates people in Linux, and this is demonstrating how a bad thing happens, and what it could have, should have happened instead is often a great learning experience. So now you see handyman. Oh, I know what I did. I created a new file called handyman update, which stored the date instead of uptime. How silly of me. All right, let's do this instead. Let's append the date to the end of the handyman uptime manual. Are you with me? So instead of update, I'm going to say uptime. And I don't want to use cat. I want to use date and then append. So append is a double right arrow as opposed to a single right arrow. I'm going to hit enter. And now if I use my up arrow key and list my files, what you see now is that the file date has changed. Does everybody see that? It's 9 minutes after 1. This is military time, 1309. System time is 109. And if I use cat to show the contents of handyman uptime, I should see the date and the time stitched onto the end of my manual. Is everybody with me?
Yep.
All right, so we have, let me do this. I want to update my roster. Yeah, there we go. So let's display using cat handyman dot uptime. It shows the manual just as it did before, but when I get to the end of it, it's stitched 109 at the bottom of my thing. Now, if I do it again, you'll see a second date timestamp, Tuesday, September 20th. Let's do that. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to put the date on handyman uptime again. And let's look at it again. Well, let me clear. A minute later, I have a new date timestamp. Now, what happens if I do this instead? What's the effect of this? Does anyone know? Does everyone see here that I'm 11 minutes after 1, according to the system time?
Yes.
Is it going to add 1311 after the 9 and the 10 and the 11?
No, I don't think so.
Let's find out. Oh my gosh. Something happened to my size My size just shrunk. What did I do to my uptime file? Well, let's find out. I'm gonna go down here.
You read over it?
I overwrote it. Yeah, that's exactly right. When I use a single right arrow, I'm redirecting the output of the date command onto the data that's stored in Handyman Uptime, and it overwrites the existing data. That's terribly frustrating. If you're trying to add to the end, add to the end. If you have a log situation where you want to capture certain pieces of information, and so you're collecting data, and you're adding it to the end of a file, end of a file, end of a file, then later you want to search for it. You want to create a database with it. You want to do all sorts of things with it. You want to create a chart or a graph. You can't if you get one little thing wrong. This is the bane of people who use Linux. They have a few of these experiences and then they run screaming from the room and they say, where's my GUI? I want my icons. I'm not cut out for this. And that's what we're trying to explain here and now. You need to crawl, walk, run. Learn the basics first, and then make sure you understand how they work, and then you're good. I'm gonna recreate my file. And this time, I'm gonna go into my system settings. Everybody with me? Where on here am I going? Time and date. Oh, Los Angeles. Do I want Los Angeles time or do I want St. Croix time? Are we Santo Domingo or Jamaica?
The closest, it's 4:14 right now, so the closest place would be the Caracas.
Yeah.
If not there, Barbados.
Well, the question I'm going to ask is that the correct time you see?
No.
Is that the correct time?
Yes.
It's
Yeah,
not
it's
okay.
4:14.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
is, yeah.
All right. So now if you see in the upper right corner, that's where I am. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And now I'm going to repeat some of my commands. I'm going to take the output of man and uptime, and I'm going to redirect it to a file called handyman.uptime. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
Now I'm going to see, do I have my handyman file? Yeah. I have the manual for uptime stored in a data file. And now I want to capture the time to make sure, because if I cat handyman.uptime, the date that shows at the end of this file is the content of that one command, which is a manual that was created in December of 2012. If I want to capture for posterity that I've done something with data and I want to put a date timestamp of 4/16, I have to do something different. So what am I going to type? Come on, if you help me write this, we're done. And the class is over. I want to append the date to the end of this text file. This text file right here.
Is
Use a
there a
double red
command to
arrow.
upend the
I-
date on a specific text file?
Say again?
Is there a command that I'm supposed to be using for this specific text file?
Yes, there is.
I know it's the double
Double red arrow.
greatest
Okay,
red
so
arrow or
there's
greater
a
than
double
symbol.
right arrow, that's right. If I want to append the date to the end of it, what's the command I use?
Oh, double upend arrow, then you enter the date, and then you enter handyman uptime.
Okay, so I'm gonna use the date command,
Yeah.
and then I'm gonna double arrow,
And then
Mhm.
handyman that uptime.
Okay. Now, if I type the date, what do you think is going to happen?
That's not a command, so nothing should happen.
That's correct. It's not a command. It's going to say, hey, there's no command, right?
Oh.
Now, I want to see what happened to this. So I'm going to go ahead and just display my manual, my data file. So I want a cat handyman dot uptime. And there it is with the correct time. It's 4:17. And it's been added below the last line that was in there before. Does everybody understand the difference between the single right arrow and the double right arrow?
Yeah,
One adds
Well,
information. Yeah, one of them adds information to the end, the other one overwrites it. So if I do uptime, single arrow, handyman dot uptime, what is this going to do? Oh, actually, I want this to be date, not uptime. What's that going to do? Is it going to add another date to the end, or is it going to ruin it?
Override it.
It'll overwrite it. Survey says. Yep, it destroyed it. It overwrote my stuff. So if you get iterative, if you get the idea that you can repeat commands and then create a running log where you add to the end, add to the end, add to the end. What have I been doing? I've been showing you a CLI process, a command line interface process, whereby a command can be repeated at different times and different values can be added to that data file. That's also iterative. Does everybody understand what we just walked through? It's this same concept that we're using the computing system to capture information of our choosing in cycles, and we're building a data file that gets bigger and bigger and bigger if we're doing it carefully. If we aren't, we're destroying it. Every time the command runs, it wipes it out and overwrites it. But we can add date timestamp, date timestamp, date timestamp. We can run commands on a script that are executed on intervals, and it collects in a data file, and then the last thing that executes is date. And that posts to the end of the data file as long as I know how to append it to the data file. Any questions before we close today? All right, I'm going to go ahead and finish posting the rest of the assignment so that it states explicitly what you need to do to post that you are ready to work with Access on your screen for Thursday. You have to complete that by Thursday. Any questions before we are done?
You just want a picture that we have